There's nothing more important in understanding your podcast and what's working, what's not from a content perspective than using your podcast analytics to know what your audience likes, what they don't, and what you should make more of as a creator. Today, we're going to be diving into the all-new, completely redesigned and reimagined Castos Analytics 2.0. Craig here from Castos. Welcome back to the channel. Today, we're going to be walking through the all-new, completely redesigned Castos Analytics to show you how you can get more insights into what's working, what's not, what your audience likes, and how to tell all of that in this kind of complicated world of podcast analytics. We built the new Castos Analytics from the ground up with all the best practices of IAB, International Association of Broadcasters, in mind to give you accurate, consistent, reliable analytics so you can make data-informed decisions about your podcast and your content. Let's dive in and see what's new in the Castos Analytics platform. Diving into the Analytics tab here, the first thing I notice is the episode markers, right? These are the yellow marks here that denote when an episode was published. This is really handy because if you're anything like me, you see these big spikes when you release an episode, and this is helpful to know, oh, this big spike correlates with like an episode released as opposed to maybe like a big social media push or somebody mentioning your podcast. So this is really handy to know. This is kind of a global view here. If you have multiple podcasts, you would see them listed in a drop-down here. By default, we show you the last 90 days, but record and retain all of your podcast analytics data. So if you want to see all time, you can do this and you can see that kind of like, 7 years of podcast data that I have. We'll go back to the last 90 days. We'll see in the last 90 days, I had about 3,000 listens for my podcast. Not bad. Spotify kind of handles their analytics a little bit differently. They measure differently than we do, which is why we don't combine them all together because it really would be an apples and oranges kind of comparison. So we give you Spotify analytics separately, and you can see this here. My podcast doesn't get a lot of action on Spotify, but depending on where you're located and your audience and kind of demographics there, you might see a lot more action and listenership from Spotify than I do. And then we have this proprietary metric that we call followers, which emulates people who consistently listen to your podcast every time a new episode comes out. So think of these as your true fans. For my podcast, I have a couple hundred, but these are the people I know listen to every single one of my episodes soon after it comes out. So pay attention to the followers metric you have in your dashboard to know kind of who those true fans are. Great. From there, we'll go to the episodes tab and just look at like, hey, who's listening, right? Across these episodes, who's listening? And my podcast is pretty consistent, right? I have a couple hundred listens per episode, and I've been publishing pretty consistently. You can deep dive into these to see more information about the specific episode. Kind of you see this big spike when it was launched, and then we have this long tail, which is pretty consistent. This is probably the type of thing you would see with most of your episodes. If you have a whole bunch of episodes like I do, I have 310 episodes, you can paginate through those episodes here. One thing to notice is you might see a drop off here for your older episodes, and this just correlates to the date filter we have here. So we're only showing data from the last 90 days, and some of your episodes may be about 90 days old. So you would only see those listens for these older episodes within the current time period that we have. Going over to the platforms and apps tab, we can tell kind of where and how people are listening to your podcast. So for my podcast, about 2/3 are listening on iOS devices. Another kind of quarter maybe are on Android, and then other over here, places we can't really categorize. This is probably like Linux and things like that. And in terms of mobile apps for my podcast, most are listening in Overcast, some in Apple Podcast, Pocket Cast, and kind of the long tail over here that constitutes the last quarter or so of this. So this is really helpful in just deciding like, hey, should I advertise, right? For me, maybe I should advertise in the Overcast mobile app because this is where about 1/3 of my audience is coming from. Maybe more people who would want to listen to my podcast are listening to other shows in Overcast, and me advertising there could really make sense. Great. And then where in the world are people listening to your show? We break this down both by countries and by metropolitan or city areas. So this is just great to know. Hey, a large percentage of folks who are listening to my podcast are listening in the U.S. And kind of metropolitan areas here. So a little bit in the U.S., a little bit in Europe. And down here below, we just have a graphical representation of this on a map to show how many listens you're getting from each country in the given time period, which again, if we come up here, this date filter persists across all of these tabs. So always showing the last 90 days unless you change that. Probably the thing I'm most excited about in Castos Analytics 2.0 is our customizable reports. So here you're able to generate, build, and save or print reports from your analytics dashboard to give to potential sponsors, to existing sponsors to report on the performance of your show, different hosts or stakeholders of your podcast. If you're working within a company, maybe you want to send this to a marketing manager. This is a really great way to show how your podcast is doing, where you're getting traction, where you're not maybe. And so we'll go ahead and generate a report now. So again, I just have the one podcast, but if you had multiple, you'd select it here and we'll go to build a report. This will open a new tab and we'll say, okay, for my podcast in the last 90 days, I'll give this a title. And I just want to show data from the last quarter. Great. So we automatically bring over the cover image, just making this look really great for you. And then from those images and those graphs we had before, we just give you the option to show any or all of these. So I like all of these. For instance, if you wanted to take out Spotify, you can. I'm going to leave it in. And then you can scroll through and preview this over on the right. So it gives you the analytics graph, gives you Spotify, gives you the number of followers, hopefully growing over time. Top platforms, right? Especially marketing managers would love to see this. Love, hey, where and how are people listening? Mobile apps, and then geographically, what countries and what metropolitan areas or cities are people listening in? So from here, you can download this report, right? This saves as a PDF on your machine, and you can send this to stakeholders and folks within your organization or to a co-host or to sponsors or potential advertisers. So I hope this is helpful in giving you kind of a walkthrough in what to expect in Castos Analytics 2.0. We are extremely proud of the quality and robustness of data here. If you're an existing Castos customer, you may see slight differences in the analytics data that we're reporting here, and it is because we're always refining the algorithms and the filtering and the counting methods that we're using to give you as accurate representation of your analytics as possible. So from all the team here, we hope you enjoy Castos Analytics 2.0. If you're not already a Castos customer, we'd love to have you. You can open a free trial of Castos for 14 days, castos.com, and we hope to see you inside.